Now let's use a research example to explain this to you. I posted the article on Blackboard and strongly encourage you to read it. The study was conducted by Robert Levine and published in American Scientist in 2003. The study examines the kindness of strangers and was designed to test one hypothesis, and that is, people's willingness to help someone during a chance encounter on a city street varies considerably around the world. To test this hypothesis, the researcher and his students traveled across the United States and much of the world to examine whether people passing by on a street are likely to help a stranger. As this map indicates, the first study was conducted in 36 cities in the United States, and the second study was conducted in 23 cities in 22 countries. As this picture shows, for one test, the experimenter would drop a pen, apparently by accident, at a moment when a stranger approaching on the sidewalk would see it fall. And if this person pointed out the dropped pen to the experimenter would code it as helpful behavior. In the second test, the experimenter wore a leg brace and walked with a limp. When a passerby approached, the experimenter would drop several magazines on the sidewalk, seemingly by accident, and then struggle to pick them up. If the passing stranger helped gather up the magazines or offered to help, it would also be recorded as a helpful behavior. And in the third test, the experimenter would pretend to be blind and approach the curb at a busy intersection just as the traffic light facing him turned green. He would then wait on the sidewalk for a passerby to offer help. And if one did so while the light was still green, it would indicate a helpful behavior. So what did the researcher find? As these bar charts indicate, the cities and countries varied significantly in the so-called kindness of strangers. For example, in Memphis, Tennessee, more than 70% of the strangers offered help in all three situations, whereas in New York City, less than 30% of strangers offered help when someone dropped a pen or struggled to pick up dropped magazines. The difference in helping behavior is most pronounced when examined across different countries. In Brazil, for example, 100% of people offered help to strangers in 2 of the 3 situations, with 80% offering help in the third situation, which posed a sharp contrast to U.S. Americans living in New York City. But why did people in different geographical areas or cultural communities differ significantly in their helpful behaviors? To find out the answers, the researcher looked at a variety of factors, such as cultural values, population density, crime rates, and GDP. As this graph shows, people's helpful behavior seemed to correlate negatively with GDP. That means the more economically better off a country is, the less likely people are to offer help to strangers. And when people are driven more by their personal interests than by social qualities such as compassion and friendliness, they are also less likely to help. And based on interviews with New Yorkers, the researcher also found that helping tends to be less dependent on the nature of the local people than it is on the characteristics of the local environment. In New York, most people were taught early on that reaching out to people you don't know can be dangerous. To survive, they should avoid anything that appears even vaguely suspicious. So it's not that New Yorkers don't care about the needs of the strangers, but the realities of the city living prohibited them from reaching out. I hope this example helps to show that first, social scientists tend to use quantitative methods, and in this case, experiments were conducted to describe and explain cross-cultural differences in our communication behaviors. And second, social scientists assume that culture is a describable external reality that can be objectively measured, and they aim to find universal generalizable patterns to help us make sense of culture's influence on communication.